And this was such a fun interview. It was a top 3 hit in 1976. It barely missed the #1 spot, only to come back decades later to hit #1 as part of the best-selling soundtrack from a blockbuster movie. This is one of those rare songs, though, that's credited to the guitarist and not the singer, but wow, what a vocal performance by one of the most underappreciated singers of the rock era. I mean, he sang the hell out of this 70s ringer, and he's the one who's going to tell us the story with a special acoustic rendition. The story of an all-time classic is coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, it's the reason we do what we do. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. Man, I am so excited about today's episode. Very special edition. I want to invite you to subscribe first right now. Get our daily features on the stories of the song straight from the legends. Also take a look at our Patreon, where we're putting up full interviews. So both Guardians of the Galaxy movies brought back a lot of classics from the 70s. We've covered a few on here, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, along with classics like The Chain from Fleetwood Mac and Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Swede, all of which we have the stories behind. But today we're privileged to get the story behind the 1976 classic Fooled Around and Fell in Love directly from the amazing singer Mickey Thomas, who of course is best known as the voice behind Jefferson Starship and Starship from the 70s and 80s. Now this song was credited to Elvin Bishop with Mickey on vocals. You're going to love the story of how this song was created. It's really entertaining. It includes an acoustic rendering from Mickey. So let's get right into this interview. Before we do that, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the frames I rock on the daily here on the show. Love these frames. Many features of Zenni that are great, but my favorite is Blue Blocks. It's a feature that protects your eyes from digital blue light, that affect us from our phones and our computer screens, with a price point that cannot be beat. $6.95 is what they start at. You choose the frame, the style, the shape, the color. You get it all. Click at our link below to get a special Professor of Rock rate, or the link's up here. Just do it. You're going to love it. Here's Mickey with the story. What was it for you, whether it was a song that you heard, a record, that kicked open the door to your mind and made you want to pursue music?
Yeah, initially it was the Beatles. Like most people of my generation, I was greatly affected by the Beatles when they first came out. And then I was lucky enough to go and see the Beatles. It was really the first concert that I ever went to was the Beatles at Atlanta Stadium. August 18th, 1965.
Wow.
With my best friends. And so, it was a life-changing experience. After we saw that, we already knew how much we loved the music, but once we saw and experienced the concert, the live media event that was the Beatles back then, we thought, we got to try this. We got to do this. So the next week we went back home to high school, South Georgia, Cairo High, and said, we're going to start a band. And my favorite Beatle was John Lennon, so I said, I'm rhythm guitar and vocals. And so we started our first band, and we were terrible. But, you got to start somewhere. And at that point in time, I really don't think I seriously ever considered that it would be something that would be a career.
Now, speaking of that concert in '65 that you went to, the Beatles, that's a treat to see them live because they stopped touring.
Yeah.
Do you remember what songs they played? Could you even hear them? Because I heard it's hard to hear them during the concert because so many girls were screaming.
You could not hear much because, it was in a baseball stadium. They did have, the stage was set up at second base. So at the four corners of the stage, they had these huge exposed drivers, cones they had no cases around them or anything that were kind of helping with the sound a little bit as far as the volume, but it sounded pretty awful. But like you said, you couldn't hear that much anyway because it was mostly just a lot of screaming. Truly was exactly like all the black and white footage that you see. Just pandemonium. Girls going crazy and screaming. There was a girl sitting behind me during the whole concert, just pulling my hair and beating me over the head with her program, screaming, Paul, Paul. Well, this is cool, but I wish I was Paul, but I'm not Paul. So it was chaos.
Do you remember a specific song they played at that concert?
I remember they closed with I'm Down. With John Lennon playing on the Farfisa organ, with his elbows and stuff, playing the organ. They only played, I'm thinking like maybe half an hour, maybe 9 or 10 songs probably.
What an experience. You started some bands after that, Jets and Lords of London, kind of a garage band. Tell me about those experiences.
Well, that's exactly it. They were garage bands. When I graduated high school and went away to college, I figured, well, that's probably it as far as my band experience. But when I got to college, I found that there were people there that were kind of coming from the same place I was, leaving their high school bands behind and looking for people to jam with and, kindred souls. And so we started having these jam sessions at the Student Union every Wednesday night. And then that kind of led to me, getting into the Jets band. And we formed the Jets kind of out of that. And then after I got the Jets going, 2 of my high school buddies decided, well, we'll just move to where you're going to school and we'll join up the Jets band with you. So did that for a few years. And then I met Gideon Daniels, which changed my life forever. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was one of those things, when they talk about destiny and kismet and fate and all that, the Sonny and Cher show was in full swing back then. So we're watching the Sonny and Cher show one night, and there was this wild-eyed, crazy gospel singer on there with this band called Gideon and Power. And he was just like wearing like this silver robe, with this thing tied around his head, this elaborate scarf, and he's running all through the audience, and it's like pure gospel music, but more with contemporary lyrics. And then his band was very unusual too. He had like a guitarist, a piano player, a bass player, no drummer, and then like 3 background singers. So he made a big impression on me. I'm thinking, I've never seen anything like that. So about a week later, I'm not kidding you, I'm sitting in the same apartment, Valdosta, Georgia. My phone rings one afternoon. I answer the phone. Hello? Is this Mickey Thomas? I go, yeah. He goes, this is Gideon Daniels calling. I said, you mean like the same guy who was on Sonny and Cher last weekend? And he goes, yes, that's me. And why are you calling me? So he said, yeah, I've decided that to kind of round out my band, what I need is a white male Southern tenor, which was based in San Francisco. Came down south on a quest, a journey to find that guy. And he was in Tallahassee, Florida, just talking to people, telling them what he was doing. And some guy who worked at a shop, what we used to call head shops, knew about me and knew that I lived in Valdosta, and he had heard me sing, and he knew I had a kind of a high voice. So he gave Gideon my number, and Gideon called me. So I said, yeah, I'd love to meet with you. And about 2 days later, we met at this old kind of antebellum house, out in the country with moss-covered trees and white columns and everything. And it was in December, so it was cold. And I remember going in the house to meet him, and there was a big fire going in the living room. And we sat in the living room and talked, and he sang a couple of gospel songs. And he said, let me hear you sing this. And I think I sang Amazing Grace or something. Yeah. So he said, okay, I want you in my band. And 3 days later, I was in San Francisco. And I say it was life-changing for me because really up to that point in time, even though I wanted to sing, and I've been in several bands and tried to sing, but I wasn't really a singer yet. I wasn't very good. But Gideon heard something in there, that this kind of untapped, I guess.
Potential.
You always hear the phrase diamond in the rough or whatever. He heard that, and then he taught me how to find that, how to use it, He really taught me how to sing. If there had not been a Gideon, there would be no career for me.
Then, of course, after that, Elvin Bishop group, your background singer.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that came together.
Because of Gideon.
Yeah, yeah.
Gideon was already friends with Elvin Bishop, came out to San Francisco to join up with his band. And so we would go around on the weekends if we weren't performing, and to wherever Elvin would be playing around the San Francisco area, where the San Francisco, Oakland, Marin County clubs, and we would just go and hang out and sit in with Elvin and jam and sing and have fun. After one of those nights, we went back to Elvin's apartment in San Francisco. This was probably about 1973. And we're sitting around the living room, and Elvin just kind of played a bit of this song that he was working on. And it sounded kind of like this, actually. Oh. It was kind of rough. And this is 1973, and he's sitting around, and he's like... I fooled around and fell in love. Of course, it was Elvin singing. Fooled around and fell in love. So awesome. It sounded a little different than that. But I remembered that song. It just stuck in my head, just a ray of light. So then, a couple of years go by. I moved back to Georgia in 1974. And then Elvin came down to Georgia to record for Capricorn Records in 1974 when he signed with them. And their studios were all based in Macon, Georgia, and their label was based there. So we had this history, and so he knew I was living back in South Georgia, so he called me up and invited me to come up and sing some background vocals on the Joint Jump album. And that went well. So then he said, well, why don't you join up with the band, come back to San Francisco, and, I need some help with vocals, harmonies, background vocals, whatever, maybe some duets, a few leads. So I said, yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to get back to San Francisco. So 75, back to San Francisco again, joined up with the Elvin Bishop band. Late 75, we're down in Miami, Florida, recording my the first album that I did with Elvin as a full-fledged member of the band. And we had pretty much recorded the whole album working with Bill Szymczyk, legendary producer who's produced so many great, the Eagles and Jay Giles and Seeger, and pretty much cut all the tracks. And we're sitting around, and Szymczyk says, well, do you have anything else? He says, I think we're just kind of missing something that would sort of round out the album, Hey, what about that? Remember that? And Elvin's like, man. That old dog? And I said, yeah, because that, like I said, I always remember that song. I always felt this special affinity for it. So Szymczyk said, well, let me hear it, So Elvin played it for him in the studio, and he goes, I like it. Let's cut it. Let's cut the track. So we cut the track, and Elvin's singing it, right? But it wasn't working out, obviously,
And that gravelly voice.
Yeah. It didn't seem to fit the song, which is probably why Elvin didn't want to, hadn't thought about recording it in the first place, because it wasn't quite right for his voice. So Szymczyk says, do you want to give this one a shot? And I said, you're damn right. So I did. And, like I said, I always had a very special feeling for the song. And urban myth says that it's a one-take vocal, but it's really two takes. It's one take up to the solo, and then a separate take after the solo. 2 takes. And then another cool thing about the song is we recorded that at Criteria Recording Studio. That, very famous recording studio. And it was right after Derek and the Dominoes had recorded, their great album there with Layla. So there was a huge grand piano out in the studio there that was called the Layla piano. And that's also the piano that's on Fooled Around and Fell in Love.
I want to ask you about kind of going into the vocal nuances. Hearing the song on the radio, and my dad kind of pointed out, you know he's singing this song, don't you? The band you like, Starship, that's him, because I grew up in the 80s. As you listen to that song, Elvin's guitar, those drum fills, and your voice, it's the perfect, they come together in this cosmic way. When you were singing it, tell me about those nuances, because there's the the harmony part, and then at the end you kind of come in and you do your thing, baby, and all that.
And then there's Elvin's solo, like you said, very blues oriented. And then in the bridge, we were able to, incorporate some of my Beatles influences with the It was the first really full-fledged album that I'd been a part of recording in the studio. So when you have that experience, like, so many bands sometimes, it's like the debut album is sometimes the best because you have this kind of lifetime of experience that you're bringing to that first album. So the gospel influence is definitely on Fooled Around and Fell in Love, especially the kind of ad-libbing jam part after the free and on my own. That's the way I used to be. I mean, that's kind of churchy.
It is.
And then before that, the more structured verses are just kind of more my R&B influence, I think.
It kind of reminds me of when Levi Stubbs and the Four Tops. You feel that song, because for me, the song, it's flowing, it's flowing. You get to that end part. What did you think when you heard Rod Stewart's version?
I thought he did a really good job on it. I did, really. I'm a Rod Stewart fan. I was always a fan of Rod, and I thought he did a great job on it.
Simply one of the greatest songs of all time. There's no question. And such an impact on pop culture. Boogie Nights. Of course, it's been an Invincible. The Family Stone.
I'm not a bad person.
You're a total mess.
You know, all of those movies. But tell me what you thought about Guardians of the Galaxy.
It was awesome, man, when Fooled Around turned up in Guardians of the Galaxy, mostly because I have an 18-year-old son who just, loves all of those kind of movies. Avengers, fan and, everything. So he was like, he couldn't wait for Guardians of the Galaxy to come out. I mean, he'd been anticipating for months and months. And then he's the one who first told me, he said, "Dad, did you know your song's in Guardians of the Galaxy?"
Really?
I said, "Which one?" And he goes, "Fooled Around and Fell in Love." And I'm thinking, okay. Sci-fi, action, futuristic adventure. How does Fooled Around and Fell in Love fit into this picture? So I found out that the whole soundtrack was kind of a 70s-based soundtrack. Found out why it was like that, because of the connection with the hero, with his mom, from the 70s, that she had given him this music that he took into the future with him. And I thought, well, that's an interesting concept. And obviously, whoever the genius is who came up with that concept.
Tell me about when you called Elvin up after it went to #1, the Guardians soundtrack.
Well, First of all, I'm in touch with Elvin a lot. So, I call him when this whole thing with Guardians of the Galaxy was going down, this phenomenon, and I said, "Elvin, can you believe this? I mean, the soundtrack debuted at #1 in Billboard." And he said, "Well, Mick, it took 38 years, but Fooled Around finally made it to #1. I said, "Yeah." When it was a hit, I can remember the two songs that were ahead of us. Because we made it to #3.
#3. It was
number three with a bullet, and it was a gold single. And most people think it was #1 single because it was so big. But there were two songs ahead of us that we just couldn't bump out of the way. It was Love Hangover by Diana Ross.
If there's a cure for this, I don't need it. I run from it.
And Silly Love Songs by Paul McCartney.
Oh, Silly Love Songs, man.
Yeah. So it's like, it's been coming for some time where younger kids just really identify with classic rock. And, I love modern music. I like, especially a lot of the newer bands, But there's something about that classic rock that I think that kids just gravitate to and connect with.
So what's interesting about the Guardians soundtrack is the only #1 soundtrack in history that have no new songs on it, just
no original
the
song.
70s.
That's pretty amazing.
Well, it just shows you the power of that music of our youth.
It is, and how it connects with a younger generation. And it's just a magical quality.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about this all-time 70s classic. What are your memories of the song? It's an empowering ballad. What are your memories of The Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack, when it came out, did it take you back to the 70s if you were alive back then? Or new viewers, it maybe introduced new songs? My kids sure loved it. Tell us about that. What do you think about Mickey Thomas? And just one of the greatest vocalists ever, and he just doesn't get the pat on the back that he deserves. Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.